So, welcome to LiberalViewer Sunday Live Clip Roundup. This is the live show I do every Sunday at 6:30 p.m. Pacific Time, where I take clips from, mostly from the Sunday morning political pundit talking head shows, and I take the ones that interest me or I think are important, and I give my commentary, and then after I show all the clips and give my commentary, I look in the discussion section and try to get a little live discussion going with my viewers. So thanks for joining me this Sunday evening. I'm going to use the 4 shows I've been using for the last several months, from NBC or MSNBC, Meet the Press, and ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos, Fox News' Fox News Sunday, and then CBS's Face the Nation. And then, of course, the other major outlet is CNN, and I've used some clips from them over the last few months, and I'm going to try to be more regular about getting clips. I have one clip from Free Zakaria GPS and a couple clips from State of the Union with Candy Crowley. So I have about 28 clips. About 10 of them, I think, are on the crisis in Egypt, another 10 on the NSA spying leaks, disclosures, the latest news on that, and then a little bit on the politics of the Republican primary coming up, or the growing conflict in the Republican Party that's leading up to the 2016 presidential election, believe it or not, and also a little bit about the federal court ruling finding the New York City stop and frisk policy unconstitutional this last week. Ray Kelly from New York City, the police commissioner there, or I think that's his title, he was on several different shows, and I wanted to I have a few clips that cover that as well. So let me get my headphones here ready. I see I have a bunch of viewers started, which I'm glad to see. I hope you can all see and hear me. Let me just see if I'm getting some. Okay, it looks like I have people who can see and hear me. Good. So the first clip I wanted to show was from CNN State of the Union. One of the interesting things about that show is that they, when it repeats for the Pacific time zone, or I don't know, however they do it, they actually sometimes do new live updated information. And there was the military general who's pretty much in charge of Egypt right now put out a statement today on Facebook, of all places, and so in the second edition of CNN State of the Union, Candy Crowley had on a couple Egypt experts to try to parse what the breaking news from Egypt, what the general, what's his name, Al-Sisi, what his statement really means. And I'll show you an extended clip. The two experts, one guy's name is, let me get everything up here so I can tell you for sure here. The first guy's name is Ned Walker, and he was an ambassador to Egypt and Israel and served both Republican and Democratic presidents. And the second guy is John Alterman, who also worked in the State Department for a while. Now he works for the Center for Strategic and International Studies. I think I have that right. So he's like in a think tank. But anyway, so I'll show you the extended clip parsing the latest statement from General Al-Sisi in Egypt here.
The first thing he said was Egypt has room for everybody, but he went on to talk about the authority to kind of crack down on terrorists. He said securing the state will remain the main objective and the sole mission of the army, the police, and the Egyptian people. Translate what that means.
Means there's going to be a crackdown, that they're not going to put up with this kind of street riots that have been going on, and the confrontation that is becoming increasingly bloody and armed on both sides. But it's not new language. It's the language of Mubarak. It's the language of the last 50 years.
So Egypt, as much as the Arab Spring and all of this, it is so reminiscent of the Mubarak era. And, you know, the question is now, what happens to the Muslim Brotherhood? Do they go underground? Does this become terrorists versus the state?
Well, it feels to me actually it's different from the Mubarak period, because the Mubarak period was a period generally of opening up. And for the last 10 years, you've had greater freedom of speech, greater freedom of association for the Muslim Brotherhood in general. That's why the Brotherhood did so well in the elections, because they had been organizing. Instead of going forward, Egypt is now going backward. I think all the nationalism, all the xenophobia, that is, it feels to me, the direction Egypt's going in. And the problem is Egypt's economy is based on being open and welcoming tourists, and the trend lines, to me, are running exactly against where the trend lines for the economic and social development of Egypt are supposed to be.
So basically, the parsing of the statement from General Al-Sisi from the two Egypt experts there, one said it means there's going to be a crackdown, and the other says it means that Egypt is moving backwards while it was moving forwards in the Mubarak era. So neither one of those things is neither one of those guys' analyses is very optimistic, and there wasn't a lot of optimism about Egypt on any of the Sunday morning shows. A lot of Republicans came out for ending the 1.5 billion, I think it's about $1.5 billion of military aid that the United States gives to Egypt. And that was starting also on State of the Union with Candy Crowley. Senator John McCain just came back from Egypt, and he kind of led the charge for the ending of military aid to Egypt in this clip.
What made you change your mind?
Well, first of all, I wanted to give them an opportunity to do the right thing after the coup had taken place. And it was pretty clear, to say the least, that they have not only not changed, but they have orchestrated a massacre, as you mentioned. We don't know, 1,000 or and many thousands wounded. We have no credibility, Candy. That's the problem, because we know that the administration called in at the Egyptians and said, look, if you do a coup, we're going to cut off aid because that's the law. We have to comply with the law. And in this administration did not do that after threatening to do so. And we are not in compliance with the law about a coup, which is clearly what it is. And then we thought there was possibly a deal to be made where they would release a couple of the Muslim Brotherhood, including the former Speaker of the Parliament, and in return for reductions in number of demonstrators, a dialogue move forward with the Constitution and elections. Obviously, the General Sisi decided not to pursue that and rejected it, and decided to use force, as we saw today, in the last few days. And with Apache helicopters flying overhead, nothing is more symbolic of the United States of America siding with the generals. We have no credibility. We do have influence, but when you don't use that influence, then you do not have that influence. We could be cutting off the aid, the spare parts and maintenance of these military equipment that we've given the Egyptians is important to their capabilities.
Right.
Tourism, economic assistance, business, the IMF loan. There are many areas where we could exercise influence over the generals, and we're not doing any of it, and we're not sticking with our values.
So there's John McCain as one of the leading Republican voices on foreign policy, I guess, talking about how he's changed his mind. Now he thinks we should suspend our aid to the military in Egypt. And there were a lot of Republicans kind of following suit, even using some of the same language. Senator Kelly Ayotte, Republican from New Hampshire, kind of said a similar thing over on Meet the Press in this clip.
Well, I think, David, in light of recent actions, we tried to give some time to the administration. They obviously tried to get the military government to not crack down in a violent way, to restore democracy, to move to elections, to release political prisoners. They've ignored all of those requests. And now with the recent violent crackdown, I do not see how we can continue aid. I believe it must be suspended because, unfortunately, I think the military has gotten the impression, and particularly with what the president not asking for aid to be suspended when he spoke this week, that whatever they do, we will continue our aid. So I do support suspending aid at this time.
So you talk.
So there's another Republican who is in favor of suspending aid, and I have to add in the next 3 clips here real quick, because I can only do 3 clips at a time. I noticed that Kelly Ayotte there was talking about what President Obama did earlier this week. For those who didn't see it, he didn't say anything about suspending aid. He said he was going to cancel the joint military exercises between the United States and the Egyptian military that was scheduled for next month. So he is starting to put some pressure on the Egyptian military there, but not really talking about suspending aid, although if you heard John McCain there say that they actually threatened to suspend aid and then didn't do it. And if that's true, that would not be good for the Obama administration. The next clip I want to show is also from another Republican, Senator Bob Corker from Tennessee, and what he was saying that was important is that even if we were to suspend aid, most of the aid for this year has already been given to Egypt. So what they're really talking about is setting up sort of a review for next year's aid, or like, you know, goalposts for the Egyptian military to meet or something like that. And so, yeah, Senator Bob Corker is also one of those Republicans who came out for suspending aid to Egypt, but he kind of explained how it's more something that's prospective rather than you know, aid that is coming for this year in this clip.
So you've switched your position. Okay. You now believe it's necessary to suspend the aid?
Yeah, but let me talk about that. I think we need to look at the tiers of our aid. Let's face it, most of the aid has already gone out the door this year. So what we're really talking about, George, is a debate that will take place this fall as we look forward to next year. And again, I think this whole discussion has been a little bit naive and to me very shallow. The fact is that we need to be looking at what is in our national interest. And is it in our national interest to have jihadis in northeastern Sinai that maybe threaten the security of Tennesseans and Americans? Is it in our national interest when we have 4.5% of the population and 22% of the world's economic output to ensure that we have priority passage in the Suez Canal and that we continue to have good jobs for Tennesseans and Americans? So I hope this debate will shift. It'll shift to a place where we're pushing, obviously, for the government to act responsibly. Look, I condemn what's happened with the military, but I also condemn what, in essence, was a political coup by the Muslim Brotherhood.
That's right.
And we need to move this debate along, and this fall, hopefully, again, focus on what is in our national interest. And there still are things within Egypt that are very much in our national interest, and we need to keep the lines of communication open.
That's why it's been...
So you can see there that that Republican Senator Bob Corker there is pointing out that even if we were to follow the policy of Kelly Ayotte and John McCain there of suspending aid, that it's really more about what's going to happen next year, and there'll be all sorts of negotiations about how they might set goalposts. And you can see sort of basically the same, almost the same thing Bob Corker said, the Republican from the Democratic senator from Connecticut, Richard Blumenthal, over on Fox News Sunday in this clip.
I agree with the president that the people of Egypt have to decide their own future, and this bloodshed, the violence in the streets, has to stop. The practical reality is that most of the military aid for this fiscal year, 2013, has already been obligated and delivered. In fact, all of it except for about 4 F-16s and maybe some helicopters. So looking forward, I think that the approach has to be to condition our future aid on specific steps toward the rule of law and return to democracy, respect for minorities and women, and a more inclusive political process, including the release of prisoners, so that the aid is released in blocks that are conditioned on those steps. And I hope the president will support that approach, which is contained in the amendment offered by Senators Leahy and Graham to the Appropriations Subcommittee bill that will come to the floor.
Congressman King.
So that is basically, it looks like almost a bipartisan agreement between Senator Bob Corker and Senator Richard Blumenthal about the suspension of aid to Egypt really being about legislation that will set markers or goalposts for the Egyptian military to meet so that they don't lose the aid. Now, some people were a little harsher. One was Senator Rand Paul, who was also on Fox News Sunday, and he seemed to say that the continuation of American aid actually showed American weakness, and of course President Obama's weakness. And I'll show you that clip here.
Yes, because the thing is I don't think we're buying any love of the Egyptian people. When they see an American tank on the street, when someone is shot down or rolled over by a tank that was purchased with American money, do you think that buys any friendship with the Egyptian people? What happens with foreign aid is basically foreign aid to Egypt is more likely to buy a lavish chateau for a dictator or a general in Paris than it is to buy bread for people in Cairo. We are not winning the hearts and minds of those in Egypt. All they do is they see our aid as something that goes to the people that are the dictators and despots that have been taking away their rights for generations. They also see it stolen. Mubarak stole it by the billions, and he had fancy homes all around the world with our money. It has to end. We don't have it, and it's counterproductive, and it shows nothing but American weakness to continue it. Those who want to continue this aid, they say, oh, we're projecting American power. They're projecting exactly the opposite. They're projecting American weakness because it shows that we are so weak that we will not even adhere to our own conditions on this aid, and it's not modulating behavior because the Egyptians just keep doing the same thing, and when they roll tanks over protesters, that's not something I think most Americans would support.
Well, I hope most Americans don't support rolling tanks over protesters, so I think Rand Paul was kind of the harshest edge of the Republican Party, but there seemed to be a lot of agreement from Republicans on the Sunday shows this morning that suspension of aid, or at least some goalposts set up so that next year's aid will have some requirements that the Egyptian military and General al-Sisi has to meet there. But there are also, some possible downsides to the suspension of that aid, and that's why I think the Obama administration hasn't suspended the aid. And I wanted to show a clip from Richard Engel, who is the, I believe he was on Richard Engel. Excuse me while I look at my notes here real quick. That's right. Richard Engel is NBC's chief foreign correspondent. And hold on, I'm going to add up the next 3 clips here too. And he was basically explaining what the feeling is on the street, and if you listen, and in the region, and it seems also that he was kind of talking about what people in Israel are thinking about this too. But anyway, I'll show you the clip from Richard Engel here.
Having people in this country and around the region think it would be an absolutely disastrous idea for the United States to cut off aid, that Washington has real interest with the Egyptian military, preferential access to the Suez Canal, military overflights, and not to mention the Camp David Accords. The Camp David Accords, brokered by the United States, the peace agreement between Israel and Egypt, says in principle that U.S. aid should be commensurate between Israel and from Washington to Israel and from Washington to Egypt. And does the United States really want to be the first country that breaks the spirit of the Camp David Accords? Whether it is breaking the law or not, it would certainly be seen here as breaking the spirit. Also, does Washington really want to back the Muslim Brotherhood? At the end of the day, we can talk about process and our love for the democratic process, but now that is broken and the choice is binary. Do we want to be with the military or do we want to be with the Brotherhood? Israel doesn't think we should drop the military and side with the Brotherhood. Neither does Saudi Arabia, neither does Jordan, neither does the UAE. I don't know why Washington would want to go against so many of its key allies.
Now, journalist Robin Wright had sort of a different analysis. That Richard Engel there seemed to be saying that all of our allies want us to continue the aid to Egypt. But Robin Wright seemed to, or was, I think, correctly pointing out that the situation in Egypt is actually dividing the Middle East, and I'll show you that in this clip.
Well, the problem is that it's not just a division inside Egypt, it's a division across the Arab world, across the Middle East. You find Saudi Arabia, which has taken a very strong stand on the side of the military, whereas Qatar is been supportive of the Muslim Brotherhood. This is something that's going to change the face of the region. It's gutted democracy in the most important Arab country. It affects the democratic experiment in the last block of countries to hold out against the democratic tide. You can't underestimate the profound nature of what's happened in Egypt and its consequences for the whole region, our interests, but the world's interests as well.
I was...
So I think, yeah, what's happening in Egypt is really consequential, and it's having a lot of effects throughout the Middle East. And I also wanted to go back to a clip from Senator John McCain, who was saying that it's part of, you know, he was talking about how the Obama administration's threat to cut off aid secretly given to the military and then not followed through on showed weakness. And then he basically said that he went on to say the Obama administration's entire foreign policy in the region is weak, and I'll show you that in this clip.
There is no policy, and there is no strategy, and therefore we react, and we react poorly. Again, one of the best examples is Syria, where the president said, if Bashar Assad uses chemical weapons, it'll cross a red line, and he's used them, and we have done virtually nothing in response to that. The centrifuges in Tehran continue to spin. Iraq unravels. Tremendous uncertainty about Afghanistan and what our forces remaining will be there, and the whole we can go through country after country and compare that to the president's vision for the Middle East in his speech in Cairo in 2009. We are much more hated and much less respected.
Senator, quickly, I've got.
We were at 2009. Go ahead.
So you can definitely see that there's a more general criticism of the Obama administration's foreign policy, that the Republicans are trying to get ready for maybe even 2014 and certainly 2016. But I noticed there was an interesting, and I have to load up the next 3 clips here, but the last Egypt clip I want to show was from Peter Beinart, who used to I think he used to be editor of the New Republic, which is a sort of center-left democratic magazine that I've subscribed to for a long time. I think he also wrote a book on, you know, on liberalism. Oops, hold on a second here. And he's usually a defender of the Obama administration, but he also said something that was really critical of the Obama administration's policy in Egypt. And hold on, I'm going to get the first 2 NSA clips ready here. Let me see. So yeah, Peter Beinart he was on Fareed Zakaria's GPS, and he was very critical of the Obama administration's policy in Egypt, as you can see in this clip.
I actually, although I'm more often in the position of defending the Obama administration, I think it's clear the Obama administration's policies have been a disaster. And it was people like John McCain and Robert Kagan who were absolutely right to say, we don't know how much leverage the U.S. had. Maybe not that much. But the moment of maximum leverage was right when that coup happened, when there was still a possibility that we could force the military to allow the Muslim Brotherhood to come back and still be a player. We didn't use that leverage.
Or it didn't work.
Well, we certainly didn't use it by coming out and saying we are going to stop aid. We could have said we're going to stop aid, in fact, and we still would have had a grace period where we could have brought it back the next year. We didn't do that. We had John Kerry going out and basically calling the military an instrument of democracy. And now it turns out that the military has been incredibly repressive, and the Muslim Brotherhood is not going away. What's going to happen is the most radical elements of the Muslim Brotherhood are going to come to the fore, and we're going to face the prospect of a Syria-like Islamist insurgency. I think it could go down as the biggest foreign policy failure of this administration.
So yeah, that is kind of pessimistic, but I wanted to end on that one, that the possibility that Egypt could be the biggest foreign policy mistake of the Obama administration if it turns into a Syria-like civil war. And you heard, Peter Beinart wasn't the only one to say that. That's kind of what I began with those experts saying that there was going to be a crackdown and the possibility of radicalization of the Muslim Brotherhood. I mean, it's not a good situation, but so that's why I wanted to start with the Egypt stuff, but I also wanted to play you a similar number of clips on the NSA spying leaks. This last week, the big story was about the Washington Post and Barton Gellman published this story based on leaks from Edward Snowden that there had been an internal audit by the NSA of their spying program. I think it's the PRISM program that showed it was like 2,700 different violations of the law, and some of the really scary parts were that they didn't really report it to the FISA court or to the Justice Department. They like used more generic language that kind of hid what happened, and now I guess and I'll show you this in some of the clips. The people who have been defending it is saying that none of them were really like willful, purposeful violations. A lot of them had to do with typographical errors, or there was one time where instead of the code for, I think it was Egypt, which was 20, the international dialing code for Egypt, they put in 202 and got like thousands of, and that's like Washington DC area code, and recorded all these phone calls from people in the DC area. And a lot of the violations had to do with foreign people's cell phones when they came to the United States not being recognized as being in the United States, which would require more protections under the FISA Amendments Act. But anyway, the first clip I want to show you is from back on State of the Union. Candy Crowley had Republican Representative Justin Amash on, and he was the one who a couple weeks ago had this in the House of Representatives put up this amendment to the appropriations bill that would have cut off funding for the NSA, and it came very close to passing. I think like 6 votes switched. It was like a 12-vote margin, so 6 votes switched would have actually passed. And so Candy Crowley asked him if these latest revelations had come out about all these privacy violations, if maybe he would have won. So I'll show you that clip here.
Well, I've certainly heard from a number of my colleagues directly and through the media that they feel differently about the amendment now, that if they had a second chance, yeah, they might have voted yes on it.
Are you going to give them a second chance?
Well, I'm hopeful that we'll have another opportunity. It might not be exactly the same amendment. This was an amendment to an appropriations bill, so it had to be written in a very particular way, and I'm hopeful we'll have a way to amend some kind of policy legislation in the future.
So that was an interesting preview of what may be going on in the House of Representatives, and I'll show you a little bit more on that later. But another question that Candy Crowley asked Justin Amash was whether he thought that the fact that this audit that was leaked showed that there actually was accountability, because they were counting up all these privacy violations, which I think that's kind of a stupid question, really. But anyway, here's what Representative Amash said in answer to that in this clip.
No, the system's not working. Americans were told by the chairman of the House Intelligence Committee that there were 0 privacy violations, and we know that's not true. Americans were assured by the president and others that the FISA court had significant oversight, and we've heard from the chief judge of the FISA court who says that's not true. And Americans have been told that their records have not been collected, that they had no data collected by the Director of National Intelligence, and we found out that wasn't true. And it's important to understand that even if all of the procedures had been followed, there would still be a government violation of people's rights, government violation of people's privacy under the 4th Amendment to the Constitution, because the records of every American in the United States are being collected without any suspicion.
Now, I definitely agree with what Representative Amash said there, although, as I showed in a previous Liberal Viewer Sunday live clip roundup, there is some controversy as to whether the Supreme Court would actually find that bulk phone record collection would violate the Fourth Amendment. The reason being that there's this third-party doctrine that, at least in the case of an individual, found that collection of or putting a tap on his phone that was at the phone company and not in his house didn't violate his privacy, because it was, you know, a business and not, he didn't have an expectation of privacy of what was going on at the business. But expanding that to collecting the phone records of every American, you know, the calls, the phone numbers that they call every day, you know, billions of phone calls. I don't know if that's actually going to work. But I'm glad to see that there are some people in the Republican Party who do see a Fourth Amendment violation. And another one of those is Senator Rand Paul, who back over on Fox News Sunday was basically criticizing the Obama administration for misunderstanding the Constitution on this. And I want to show that clip here.
You know, I think the president fundamentally misunderstands the constitutional separation of powers, because the checks and balances are supposed to come from independent branches of government. So he thinks that if he gets some lawyers together from the NSA and they do a PowerPoint presentation and tell him everything's okay, that the NSA can police themselves. But one of the fundamental things that our founders put in place was they wanted to separate police power from the judiciary power. So they didn't want police to write warrants, and the NSA are a type of police. They wanted the judiciary, an independent, open judiciary, responsive to the people with open debate in public. So I think the constitutionality of these programs need to be questioned, and there needs to be a Supreme Court decision that looks at whether or not what they're doing is constitutional or not.
And I definitely agree with Rand Paul on that, though I am a little worried, based on what I was saying before that clip, about how the Supreme Court would actually rule. Because there is a possibility, based on this, I don't want to show that again. Based on this third-party doctrine, that they might actually not find a violation of the Constitution. Excuse me here just for a minute while I also want to show you another clip from Rand Paul, the last one from him on the NSA, I think. No, there's one more after that. But let me just load up the next 3 clips here real quick. And so, in addition to saying that the Obama administration or President Obama misunderstands the Constitution, Rand Paul was also asked about the value of Edward Snowden's leaks, and whether the audit shows, kind of that same question of, is the system working or not. And so I want to show you what Senator Rand Paul said about that here.
And without this Snowden leak, in fact, we wouldn't even know of this internal audit. Without the Snowden leak, we wouldn't have known that James Clapper lied to us, lied to the Senate, and said, oh, that we were not collecting any data on Americans. And it turns out, yes, they're collecting billions of pieces of data on American cell phones every day.
No. So, yeah, Senator Rand Paul was definitely saying that the congressional oversight was that without the Edward Snowden leak, there was a lot of stuff we wouldn't know. And about what he was talking about with James Clapper lying to Congress, I've shown this clip several times, but I never tire of showing this clip. This is from last March, before the Edward Snowden leaks. This is what James Clapper told Senator Ron Wyden when he asked about whether the NSA was collecting phone records on all Americans or millions of Americans. And this is what he meant when Director of National Intelligence James Clapper lied to the Senate in this clip.
Last summer, the NSA director was at a conference, and he was asked a question about the NSA surveillance of Americans. He replied, and I quote here, "The story that we have millions or hundreds of millions of dossiers on people is completely false." The reason I'm asking the question is, having served on the committee now for a dozen years, I don't really know what a dossier is in this context. So what I wanted to see is if you could give me a yes or no answer to the question, does the NSA collect any type of data at all on millions or hundreds of millions of Americans?
No, sir.
It does not.
Not wittingly. There are cases where they could inadvertently, perhaps, collect, but not wittingly.
All right.
So that's where we were before the Edward Snowden leaks. We were with James Clapper rubbing his head furiously and telling us that the NSA doesn't collect records on millions of Americans, basically lying. And even John McCain, who said some negative things about Edward Snowden, had to admit that there are things that we know about that from Edward Snowden that he should have known about just by being in Congress. This back on State of the Union with Candy Crowley in this clip.
Why do we have to keep finding out this information by revelations from Mr. Snowden? He's giving credibility, particularly amongst young people, that he is sort of a Jason Bourne character. We need better congressional oversight. Where was the Congress in this? And was the Congress informed? We know that Mr. Clapper, the Director of National Intelligence, made a false statement to Congress in open hearing, in a Senate hearing. So we need more congressional oversight. We need more information. And can't we find these things out from somebody besides Mr. Snowden, who I believe was violation of his oath to the United States of America?
So there's John McCain both attacking Edward Snowden and also admitting that we needed Edward Snowden at the same time there, which I thought was interesting, and also talking about how James Clapper had lied to Congress there. So I have like a few more NSA clips I want to show you. I have to load up the next 3 clips here. The next one I want to show you is actually from the House of Representatives. I showed the Representative Justin Amash at the beginning talking about how his amendment that almost passed might, if the stuff that came out this last week had been known, might have passed, but that the same thing wasn't going to come up again. There would be some sort of a slightly different legislation. And one of the people who was on Face the Nation this morning was Representative Bob Goodlatte, who is the chair of the House Judiciary Committee, and he basically was responding, or he was giving more information about what the legislation in the House of Representatives might look like, and I think this is kind of what Representative Justin Amash was also talking about. Anyway, you can see that in this clip.
Classified briefing, we then are going to be seeing legislation introduced in our committee. I have absolutely no doubt about that, and we will then undertake that. Some of the things that are suggested are to make it clear that the law, Section 215, does not allow the government to gather large sums of data like they do. Also, we need to have more transparency in the FISA court system. Decisions are being made there not just on individual cases, but on broader-based policy matters that are not being reviewed outside of the court and not readily available to the public or even most members of Congress. I had members of Congress complain to me about their inability to see some of those court decisions, and I think that the public's confidence.
Yeah, so that's Representative Goodlatte talking about what his committee may be doing, but there was also Senator Rand Paul back on Fox News Sunday was saying that there may actually be a flaw in the congressional oversight in that they kind of only get one-sided information. I wanted to show you that clip here.
Yes, and I think legislation could help. The hard part is that we only hear one side also. Mm-hmm. The NSA comes and they tell us our side and tell us their side, tell us how they've foiled all these plots. But it turns out when there is a discussion back and forth, we really discover that they did not uniquely use this American surveillance program to get anyone. I think they got most of the terrorists, or stopped most of the terrorists, if not all of the plots, by good old-fashioned police work and getting warrants and getting wiretaps on people who they were suspicious of, whom they ask a judge about. And I'm not against that. I'm all for surveillance of spies. I'm just not for this gross bulk gathering of data on all Americans.
In fact, you won't.
So I guess Rand Paul won't be joining with Bob Goodlatte on this legislation that is going to put limits on the bulk data collection, but not stop the bulk data collection. And that also seems to be sort of, there's bipartisan agreement on both opposing and sort of in favor of the NSA spying. And that's the last. I have 3 more NSA clips I want to show you, actually 2 more NSA clips I want to show you, both from Democrats who basically what they're saying is that they're not going to stop the bulk data collection, they're just going to put limits on it. So the government's going to have all the phone records, but they're going to try to pass legislation that will just limit the way it can be used. And one is Chris Van Hollen, who's in the Democratic leadership in the House of Representatives. You can see him defending bulk data collection, but wanting to put limits on it in this clip.
So there's a distinction to be made between the collection of raw data, right? NSA having exactly what the phone companies have. And what's the test? What's the standard for the NSA being able to search or query that data? Right now, you have to have a reasonable suspicion that that phone number was involved in terrorist activity. My concern is NSA can reach that judgment unilaterally. They do not have to get advance notice from the FISA court. So I propose that before they do any kind of query, any kind of search, they have to go to the FISA court. And at that step in the process, we also have what's considered a citizen's advocate to take the adversarial position before the FISA court. So you have that give and take. Those are important reforms. I think most people are concerned that NSA is willy-nilly getting content or doing searches. And I do believe we should make sure that that can never happen.
Even if they're
So there's a Democrat who sounds like he is not going to stop the bulk phone record collection so that the government is still going to collect the phone numbers that every American calls every day, not the content of the phone calls. But he's going to try to pass legislation that's going to put limits on when they can query it and how they can use it. There's sort of a similar position over on Face the Nation from another Democratic representative, Bobby Scott, although he talked about some more about the abuses, and I want to show you that clip here.
They say it was just the numbers, but it doesn't take much of an operation to put names on the numbers. You can go on the internet and start connecting names and numbers. But the question is, after you've gotten it, what do you do with it? There was a Supreme Court case a few weeks ago on DNA that said that if you're charged with a sex crime, they got your DNA, and they find out it's not you, they can keep the DNA. And what's the first thing they're going to do? They're going to run it through the database to see if you've committed a crime. Now, if they went up to you and said, give me some DNA, we want to see if you've committed a crime, that would be legally laughable. But once they've got it, they can do with it what they want. Now, they said they get all these phone records, but they only query the information judiciously. Well, there is no, I can't find anything in the code that limits what they can do with that information, particularly in criminal investigations. And so they say, well, they're not doing it. Well, I want to rephrase Ronald Reagan and say we should trust but codify. Put it in the code what they can do, because they have virtually unlimited. And then they said they have promised us they're not using it for criminal investigations. There's a leak, I don't know if it's true or not, that some of this information that they've gotten has been tipped off from the NSA, has been sent over to the FBI. They, according to the leak, will use that leak to bust somebody. When they get the information, they tell the FBI to kind of fabricate some probable cause, so it looks like it didn't come from the NSA. They don't tell, in response to queries from defense lawyers, they don't turn over the fact that it was an NSA situation. which raises all kinds of questions. So we don't know. But the real question is, what can you do with the information after you've gotten it? And it seems that we've been told one thing, what they do, and they kind of fuzzify us what the process is that they use and what the law restricts. And
So what?
So yeah, I don't understand how Representative Bobby Scott there can basically accept that position that we'll let them collect the data, only put restrictions on what they do with it, after he talked about that leak from the week before last, that the NSA has actually been feeding some of their bulk collection information to the DEA or to local law enforcement on these drug cases, and then they're like making up chain of evidence pretending they got the information from somewhere else, and the defense attorneys never get to challenge it. And I mean, that is like one of the worst things I've heard from this whole NSA leak thing, even worse than this last week about the thousands of privacy violations or inadvertent privacy violations. But anyway, those are the NSA spying clips I wanted to show you this week. But speaking of police misconduct or people or law enforcement going over the line, one of the other stories this last week was the New York City stop and frisk program was found unconstitutional by a federal judge. I mean, some of the statistics, and I'll show you that in just a minute here. First, I'll show you from NBC's Meet the Press, Ray Kelly, the police commissioner. I can't remember I'm sure his exact title will come up here in a minute, but he went on several different Sunday morning shows this morning trying to defend the stop and frisk policy. First I wanted to show you from NBC's Meet the Press. David Gregory basically read him from the federal district court judge decision finding the racial profiling and the unconstitutional stop and frisk policy. Here, I'm just loading up the next 3 clips here, so I'll have them all ready to go. So yeah, the first one is NBC Meet the Press, David Gregory reading the federal court opinion to the police commissioner Ray Kelly and getting his reaction here.
Highest officials, she writes, have turned a blind eye to the evidence that officers are conducting stops in a racially discriminatory manner. In their zeal to defend a policy they believe to be effective, they have willfully ignored overwhelming proof that the policy of targeting the right people is racially discriminatory and therefore violates the United States Constitution. You strongly disagree. Why?
I do strongly disagree. This case cries out for appeal. The judge has indicted the entire New York City Police Department, 35,000 officers for racial profiling on the flimsiest of evidence. You look at the expert for the plaintiff and what he found. He looked at 4.4 million stops over a 10-year period. He found 6% of them were, in his opinion, unjustified. In the trial itself, there were 4 plaintiffs, there were 12 witnesses, there were 19 stops. The judge herself found that 10 of the stops met constitutional muster. There were some problems with the frisk, the judge pointed out. But this is very small evidence, a small amount of information to have such a sweeping finding.
Commissioner.
Now, that is not a accurate representation of the opinion of the judge that I saw, and actually right down in the video description below where I'm speaking, I have put a link to the federal judge's opinion that you can read for yourself. But I was also happy to see that David Gregory on Meet the Press immediately confronted Police Commissioner Ray Kelly with some of those numbers that, as you can see in this clip.
Those numbers that you reference and put it up on the screen for our audience and go through some of those numbers and where some of the criticism is. 4.4 million stops, 6% arrests, 6% summons, 88% no further law enforcement action. And then look at who is getting targeted: 52% black, 31% Hispanic, 10% white. I first want to focus on that 88% number. Of people not doing anything wrong. Does that not say to you, as the commissioner of the police, we're doing too much of this?
No, it doesn't mean that people are not doing anything wrong. If you look at the statute, it says reasonable suspicion that individuals may be about to commit, are committing, or have committed a crime. One of the classic examples that we use is somebody going down the street trying door handles, or a group of young men that a bodega owner fears going to strong-arm rob them when they leave their store. So there's a preventive aspect to this, and people say innocent. That's not the appropriate word.
Well, there was no further law enforcement action.
Well, what you use here is a standard of reasonable suspicion. If you have probable cause, then you have enough to effect an arrest or issue a summons. This, by the way, is a standard law enforcement practice throughout America. It's certainly not just going forward in New York. And as far as your second set of numbers are concerned, we think the reasonable criteria is a criteria that was developed or presented to us by the RAND Corporation, an institution that's been in existence for 100 years, that says that to take a look at racial profiling and determine if it happens, you should first look at the universe of people who are identified by the victims of crime, the perpetrators identified by the victims of violent crime. What does that universe look like? And in New York, that universe certainly comports to the racial makeup of the people who are being stopped.
Well, so, let me...
That is, I mean, there are several bogus parts to that argument. First, if you actually go read the RAND Corporation study that he's citing, they show that there were some police officers who were definitely racial profiling. They show that there were definitely problem officers, which he never mentions. And then the whole basis, you know, what he's talking about, a stop and frisk is based on the Supreme Court case of Terry versus Ohio, which says that if a police officer has a reasonable suspicion that criminal activity is afoot, he can go up and ask questions, and then he can frisk the person for his safety if he has some basis to believe that there's a threat to his safety. And one of the statistics that they didn't go into there, but if you look in the opinion, it's right near the beginning. You can see pretty clearly that something like 1.5% of the frisks resulted in finding weapons. So that seems to me, based on the Terry standard, that you have to have a suspicion before you frisk someone, you have to have some reasonable suspicion that they're a threat to you. The fact that they only found a weapon in 1.5% of the cases, that shows that their suspicions weren't reasonable. And that's kind of the same thing with the 88% of the people who they didn't find any crimes. I mean, the fact that just because they weren't arrested or charged with anything, they still might have been guilty with something, I mean, that is totally backwards. It's actually, even an arrest doesn't show that you're guilty of anything. You have to be convicted to be guilty of something. So I find that whole argument, there are several bogus parts to that argument. And I want to show Ray Kelly one more over on, I think this was over on This Week with George Stephanopoulos. He tried to show that it wasn't unconstitutional. I want to show one more clip from him. Over here.
The critics call it racial profiling. The judge called what you do, stop and frisk, unconstitutional. Why is it not racial profiling?
Well, you have to apply a formula of sorts. Do the stops comport with the description given by the victims of perpetrators of violent crime? And our stops certainly do. 97% of the shooting victims in New York City are black or Latino, as is the identified perpetrators of these crimes.
The issue.
So I want to show that because that is also a totally bogus way of trying to come up with the reasonable suspicion under Terry, because he's saying what percentage of the perpetrators violent crimes are match up with the races of the people they stop, but he's not saying that they have any reasonable suspicion that the people they're stopping are involved with those violent crimes. So there's so many different ways that the arguments he's making are bogus. And I, again, go through and read the opinion from the federal judge. I definitely recommend that to anyone. Now, I have a couple clips also from Ben Jealous, who's the head of the NAACP that I wanted to show. Let me load those up here real quick. And one I agree with, and one he actually kind of makes a mistake I didn't quite understand, but I wanted to show it anyway. Let me just load up the next 3 clips here real quick. The first clip, Ben Jealous is basically brought on Meet the Press right after Police Commissioner Ray Kelly gives his defense of the program, and he basically disagrees with, as you might expect, disagrees with Police Commissioner Ray Kelly's analysis, and I want to show you that clip right here.
So this is the problem. You know, we just heard a man who aspires to be the head of the Department of Homeland Security say that his officers have to violate the U.S. Constitution to make us safer. That should send chills down the spine of everyone in this country.
Right, but he would take issue that there's any violation going on. That's why they're appealing the decision.
That's
right?
what a federal judge just found.
Yep.
All right, that in our country, it's the federal judge, not the chief, who gets to decide what the U.S. Constitution says. Now, the problem is that the fall in homicides happened prior to 2002. And the increase in stop and frisk happened after 2002. So there's no relationship between these two.
So I want to show that clip because 2 things that Ben Jealous said there are true and really important. One is that, you know, those people who say that the stop and frisk has caused this increase in safety, the stop and frisk actually started after the drop in crime. So there's a problem with that. And also what Ben Jealous there, and you know, I definitely agree with him what he's saying about the policy being unconstitutional. But then he went on to say something about Terry versus Ohio, which is a 1968 case, and that somehow Rudy Giuliani had like immediately implemented this 1968 case, which didn't make sense. Anyway, I'll show you that clip over here.
It's not a program. It is a program. Stop, question, and frisk was introduced by Mayor Giuliani right after the Terry versus Ohio decision as a specific program in the city. Under Giuliani, we saw about 80,000 per year. Under stop and frisks, this racial profiling program. Under Bloomberg, in 2011, we had about 680,000, 90% innocent, 90% people of color, and get this, 99.9% don't have a gun. About 700,000 stop and frisk, about 700 guns seized.
The wider.
So everything he said there is true, especially about the 99 point whatever % not having a gun, and that's important because of the frisk has to be based on fear of a weapon, and if they're wrong 99% of the time, that, you know, that's what Terry versus Ohio says. But one thing he said that didn't make sense there was Terry versus Ohio was a 1968 case, and Mayor Giuliani was not mayor until like 1994, I think, something like that. Back in like 1968 or 1970, New York passed its law that codified the Terry versus Ohio standard, and I think Rudy Giuliani was in the U.S. Attorney's Office at that time, so I don't think he was involved in that at all. So anyway, I wanted to show you those clips from Ray Kelly and from Ben Jealous on opposite sides of the stop and frisk debate. And then I have a couple, or I think 3 or 4 more clips I want to show you real quick. Yeah, 3 more clips basically about the brewing split in the Republican Party on who's going to be their presidential nominee, their standard bearer for 2016, who's going to lead the Republican Party. And there's basically the Rand Paul, Ted Cruz, Tea Party, Libertarian wing, And then it looks like there's going to be Chris Christie, and I'm not sure who else, but as the more establishment wing. I've been showing on the LiberalViewer Sunday Live Clip Roundup over several weeks. I've been showing this spat between Chris Christie and Rand Paul, and it's gone back and forth over several different issues, NSA spying and pork barrel spending. And anyway, Rand Paul was asked about that on Fox News Sunday, and I wanted to show that last Rand Paul clip on that issue. He was basically saying that he's right because he's trying to expand the party for libertarians, and you can see that here.
What I would say is the party's big enough for both of us. It's big enough for a lot of different Republicans. And in fact, we don't need to. This all started with him saying, oh, we don't have room for libertarian Republicans. The thing is that's how we grow our party. Libertarian Republicans like myself care about the right to privacy. We care about a more moderate and less aggressive foreign policy. And I think that will bring new people to our party. Look, the party in the Northeast is shrinking almost down to nothing. They need to be looking to people with new and different ideas who will attract youth, independent, and even Democrats to our party. So saying there's no room for us was a big mistake on their part. I will continue to say we grow the party by embracing some of these issues that have to do with individual freedom and also the right to privacy.
So that's sort of Rand Paul's latest salvo in the fight he's having with Chris Christie over who's going to be the standard bearer of the Republican Party in 2016, believe it or not. At this early date, they're already doing that. And there was actually a back and forth between conservative Rich Lowry, who's editor of the National Review magazine, and then Robert Gibbs, who used to be press secretary for President Obama, and they were both talking about how this might have been a good week for Chris Christie in the fight for the soul of the Republican Party, and I want to show you that clip here.
Rand Paul, I think, is a little sterile, because you have the Rand Paul camp saying the party needs principles. Well, of course it does, because any party without principles is rudderless and passive. And you have Chris Christie saying you need power and a compelling governing agenda. Well, of course you do, because that's the only way to affect your principles. So it's not either or, it's both. And I think what Christie is after here is exactly the George W. Bush model, saying my huge re-election is a model for what I can do in a general election and a presidential race. And what he would hope to do is cement that establishment slot in the primary and hope he's facing a divided field on the right. And if history is any guide, that's a pretty good way to win a Republican nomination.
Robert Gibbs. And the pathway may have gotten a little clearer because the RNC did a very savvy thing this week. Right? First of all, they're working the refs on these Hillary documentaries and Hillary specials, right? Reince Priebus is just working the refs so that when the script goes into production, somebody will say, make this scene tougher. The second thing he's doing is he's cutting down markedly on the number of debates, which became the Roman Colosseum of Republican politics last time, which are, populated in huge auditoriums where activists want more and more and more, and it becomes you run for president in order to get a radio talk show when you don't win the nomination. If those things fall a bit by the wayside, you've moderated the process a bit, the establishment candidates have more control over this, probably a better week for Chris Christie than it was for Ted Cruz or Rand Paul.
So here Now, I find that a little hard to believe that the Republican Party is really going to make their process easier or easy enough so that Chris Christie or a non-conservative, someone with all of his non-conservative views, could actually win the nomination. And I think NBC on Meet the Press, Chuck Todd, NBC political analyst, had a more realistic view of that, and that's the final clip I want to show you here.
On paper, as a general election candidate, you sit there and you say, okay, that's probably the best person they could do to go win a couple of purple states. Like, who can go in there and win Florida? Who can go in there and win Iowa or Michigan, right? Who can connect with the working class Democrats? Well, maybe, the overweight guy from New Jersey, and I mean that as it makes him seem less sterile. Mitt Romney was this scripted type businessman who had this regimen and he jogged every morning. And Chris Christie seems like an everyman, and particularly against a political dynasty if you're going up there. The problem is, how does he get through this primary process? Because conservatives are going to argue, you know what? Bush was a compromise. McCain was a compromise. Romney was a compromise. We've gone with the establishment. Bob, we can keep going back. Bob Dole, 4 straight times. What's it really done for the Republican Party? Is it in a better place today than it was back during the Reagan era? And I think that that's going to be the real fight inside the party. And Chris Christie has to figure out how does he prove that he's conservative enough. And it's going to be tough.
So yeah, I think that is a more realistic analysis of how Chris Christie will do in the Republican primaries, and unless they really want to win against Hillary Clinton and he takes some more right-wing stances in the next couple years, and I don't know, maybe Chris Christie will move to the right. But anyway, those are the clips I wanted to show you this Sunday. I hope you enjoyed the analysis of the situation in Egypt and the latest NSA spying revelations, and the stop and frisk clips with Ray Kelly, and then that last politics of the Republican Party. I'm going to look real quick, see if I see some discussion in the comment section here that maybe I can comment on, although I'm getting a little late for dinner here. But let me see what we got in the comment section. Oh, Ken Fraser, bad poker face Clapper. Yeah, every time I show that James Clapper clip, I say, you know, the way he rubs his head there, he should not play poker. That is like the worst tell. So I definitely agree with Ken Fraser. Mr. X00666. Wow, David Gregory actually doing journalism. Wow, yeah, he did actually show Ray Kelly some statistics about the racial profiling in New York. So, and then Pat's Rules 213 says LV does show a lot of establishment media clips, so maybe he doesn't truly get it. And I don't know, maybe the David Gregory. Well, you know, the thing is, I am showing you clips from the main American media news outlets, and I added CNN. You know, I'm telling you, I'm showing you NBC, MSNBC. I'm showing you CNN. I'm showing you ABC, CBS, Fox News, and when I choose the clips, when I watch the shows in the morning, or throughout the day, I have to watch them. I actually try to avoid the pundits. You know, I do show some pundit clips like that Chuck Todd one, that last one, but I have a bias for showing clips of the actual newsmakers, of like the senators and the representatives, and you know, Glenn Greenwald and Barton Gellman. I have a bias for them because they are the 2 journalists that Edward Snowden gave his leaks to. But you know, I'm showing you corporate media. There's no doubt about that. But I'm trying to show you the newsmakers themselves, the people, the politicians in charge, and you know, trying to show you the raw interviews, even though that the people doing the interviews are in the corporate media, and I've mentioned that on many occasions. But anyway, let me see if I can get a couple more here. The analytical failure says, LiberalViewer, now that we know the NSA has actually been searching through emails and doing much more than just collecting metadata, can we now say this is either incompetence or lying? Well, I mean, they're the 2 different programs. There's the Patriot Act Section 215 program where they're collecting the metadata, but the leak that came out this week about where they're inadvertently collecting content, that's the PRISM program that's supposed to be targeted at foreign people overseas, but sometimes they mistakenly get the content of people in the United States. And also, if you're the way before the FISA Amendments Act, the way it worked is that if either end was in the United States, they would have to get a warrant. But now the way it's written is if they're targeting someone who's a foreign person overseas, they don't need to get a specific warrant from the FISA court, even if the person on the other end of the phone is a United States citizen living in the United States. And so it gives them a lot more leeway. If they're just targeting a foreign person, they can gather up a lot more under the PRISM program. And so the Section 215 program, with every phone call that every American makes every day, that is just metadata. But then the PRISM program is collecting up a lot of content. anyway, so I appreciate all the people who have been watching the show live today, and I went through and I got a couple comments there, but as I said, I'm a little late for dinner, and we're way over. I think we're at like an hour and 10 minutes now, so I'm going to finish up the show. I hope you have a good rest of your weekend, or for my European viewers, a good good beginning of your week. And I'm still working on that video about the Reza Eslan interview on Fox News and the reaction to it. I've talked about that before. I won't go into it, but this is kind of a transitional time. If you want to know about my personal life with I'm a stay-at-home dad, and this is like when my daughter was done with camp and going back to school. Anyway, so hopefully I'm going to have more time to make videos, produced, edited videos in the next week or so. So look forward to that. I have a couple coming up, I think, before the end of the month. So anyway, thank you again for joining me. I hope you enjoyed the clips, and I'll see you around on the internet.